Hello and welcome to everyone. Thank you for taking the time to be here. My name's Sally Ashby. I'm the Sussex Kelp lead and I'll be facilitating this meeting. Just a bit of housekeeping before we get going. If you could all put your microphones on mute, that would be great. We've set it up as a regular Zoom, so we want to minimize feedback and things like that. If you do experience any glitching or issues, it might be wise to turn your video off, certainly at least whilst people are speaking in presentation sort of mode. And we're going to have the chat box available, so if you have specific questions that you want to ask, feel free to put that in the chat and somebody will try and answer them. If you're able to, it would be fantastic. I know it's a bit of a bore, but on your name on Zoom, if you're able to add your organization, to rename yourself, to include your organization, that would be really great. The plan for the meeting is we will introduce the next phase of this exciting project, the Sussex Kelp Restoration Project. And then towards the end, we'll go into breakout groups. And they'll be much smaller, and then you can have your video on and that'll be much more like a sort of regular conversation. What else? I will be sending out this presentation in PDF format after the meeting. So don't worry, because time's limited. If you feel like we've gone through the slides and you haven't had a chance to read the details, we'll send that through to you. And yeah, really just to start us off, to give you a bit of background. I mean, you will recognise the team that is behind the Sussex Kelp Restoration Project is the Help Our Kelp team, who did a fantastic job with the Help Our Kelp campaign. So you have the Sussex Wildlife Trust, Big Wave Productions, Blue Marine Foundation, the Marine Conservation Society, and the University of Portsmouth. And all of those were supporting the Sussex IFCA and the bylaw. And obviously now we have the bylaw in place, which is brilliant. So I'm going to hand over to Sean Ashworth, who's just going to give a bit of context and background about the bylaw. So over to you.
Hi, Sally. Thanks, everyone. Is that good? Can you see and hear me?
Yeah, all good.
Yeah.
Sean.
Very good. Right. Thank you, Sally. Thank you, everyone, for letting us have a couple of minutes at the beginning of this. So that's all we're scheduled for, isn't it, Sally? About 5 minutes, is that right? That sort of thing. Great. So for those of you who aren't aware of what an IFCA is or does, and you know, not everybody is aware of that. We are an inshore fisheries and conservation authority. There's 10 IFCAs around the English coastline. Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland have different arrangements. And we are Sussex IFCA. And so we do what we say on the tin, really. We look after Sussex inshore fisheries and conservation. So what that means in reality is that we manage fisheries, marine fisheries, out to 6 nautical miles, and we do that through instruments like bylaws. And when we say fisheries, we mean commercial and recreational fisheries. And when we say conservation, what that means is we manage fisheries on conservation sites, marine protected areas, but in its wider context, we manage sustainable fisheries throughout our entire district. And that's where we are with this kelp stuff. So that comes into the trawling bylaw. So when the IFCAs were set up in 2000 under the Marine and Coastal Access Act 2009-10, DEFRA immediately asked the IFCAs to review all their management, and that's what we've been doing ever since. I joined Sussex IFCA in 2015, and a few years ago, we got to the point where we were ready to start looking at and reviewing our trawling management. So we started to look at the evidence. You can see on the slide, there's just a few pointers on this slide. In the the top left is a map of trawling activity in the Sussex district that we collect. So we have a boat a patrol boat goes out, and when she's out, she collects sightings information that helps us understand the picture of fisheries in our district. So we looked at the evidence, and as part of the evidence that popped up when we were looking at trawling was this fantastic kelp story. I see Eric Smith is here. He's very much a part of that story and part of highlighting that story to us, in effect, showing us that there used to be this amazing kelp forest in Sussex, and now it's not there. So we started to scratch deeper and deeper into that story, because one of the elements that we wanted to look after was we wanted to do our fisheries management on an ecosystem basis. So instead of what you might call a traditional count some fish and then allocate some of those fish to commercial fisheries, etc., we wanted to look after the ecosystem so it produces, so it becomes an engine of fisheries production, and you can really start to generate naturally functioning sustainable fisheries. So we did that. So the main picture on that is a map of where the kelp used to be, quite frankly, and the blue blotches on the main map are where the kelp used to be. That's all gone, and we decided we wanted to bring it back. So the red line on the map is which was, but now is, the proposed bylaw boundary, where we were going to say, where we said we don't want to see any trawling, any bottom-toed gears in this area at all. And the idea being that the kelp, to give this kelp some breathing space so it could regenerate in that trawl-free space. So that's what we proposed. And we have quite a lengthy consultation process that we have to go to, quite rightly, because we bring in management that becomes law. So it has to be squeaky clean and everything bolted down. So we went through the consultation process, and that's where the Help Our Kelp group really came in and came into its own, and really kind of went into bat for the kelp forest that used to be there. And I've got the little picture. I'm sure Sarah will probably talk about this in a minute, but I've got the little picture of our mate Sir Dave. Sarah put together an amazing short film on the story of the kelp, and was amazing in getting Sir Dave to narrate that, and that made a huge difference to the outreach of that consultation, basically. So the film really enhanced the consultation. The Help Our Kelp group really crystallized some of that community engagement, and we did it. So we now have the nearshore trawling bylaw, aka the kelp bylaw. So in that red line there, within that red line, all trawling is banned. And yeah, now I guess it's a case of watch this space, and then onto the rest of the meeting.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sean. That was fantastic. And yes, we're going to segue straight into Sarah from Big Wave Productions to tell us more about that fantastic campaign and film. So over to you, Sarah.
You're muted, Sarah.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm just going to tell you about some of the things that we've managed to pull off as a group. And first, I really wanted to share a little bit of our kelp history. And it's a history, as Sean sort of alluded to, that has a really powerful message. And that is, if we all work together, amazing things really can happen. And I want to just tell you a little bit about my story, which starts back in the summer of 2019. And I'm about to meet Sean Ashworth from IFCA for the very first time, actually about shellfish collectors. That's another story. We have a coffee, and as we talked, Sean told me about how the Sussex Kelp Forest had virtually all gone. Now, back in the day, I was a scuba diver, and I remember those forests, and they were vast and they were magnificent. So to think they had all gone on our watch was nothing short of shocking. So listening to IFCA's plans to ban inshore trawling, I thought was visionary. But as I listened to Sean, I just couldn't stop thinking about the hurdles that he needed to overcome to get the bylaw signed off. And it was things like, would anybody ever actually care about kelp? Did people even know what it was, let alone realise its importance? And it was really at that moment that I said to Sean, I'm going to make you a film that you can use to help communicate how important this bylaw is. And it's something that you can show to fishermen, you can show to the general public. Well, that coffee triggered a real cascade of events. And in the summer of 2019, we set to make that film. And it was actually a lot more difficult than I thought, because there really was hardly any kelp left. And of course, the big pivotal action to happen was reaching out to Sir David. Now, most people at this point thought that I was having another one of my dream on moments. But one day in September, the phone rang and picked it up. David Attenborough here. Yes, Sarah, I want to support you. When do you want to record? And well, needless to say, I nearly fell off my chair. But that was the pivotal moment for our campaign. And the Help Our Kelp group launched with the Sussex Wildlife Trust, Blue Marine Foundation, Marine Conservation Society, and we started to plan our press campaign. And in the autumn of 2009, and I'm sorry to shout about what we've done, but I'm pretty proud of what we've all done as a group. We released a film across TV, clips were shown across all social media, and of course in print too. And our content reached literally millions of people. We were trending online, and Sussex Wildlife Trust had created an amazing webpage where the general public could sign up and show their support for the IFCA bylaw. And the signatures poured in. Our comms engagement, I think it's fair to say, has helped to generate a huge swell of support for the IFCA trawling ban. I think Sally's got a little clip just to show, it's just 10 seconds of an example of what we released.
These underwater forests are among the most productive places on Earth, supporting a huge range of marine life.
So, consultation over, the Kelp Partnership continued to pressurise government bodies, hassle MPs, and also the Secretary of State. And we also mobilised our growing number of supporters to write letters of support too. So there's no doubt as a collective that we've raised the national conversation on kelp, empowering many other groups, organisations and individuals to get involved. So I'd really like to close by saying the Kelp Team's comms programme continues. We're now filming the return of the forests in Sussex, and we'll be filming with Eric Smith, who, as Sean mentioned, is with us today. And Eric is undoubtedly our figurehead champion of the Sussex Kelp, and he's still freediving today. It was Eric that, long before the bylaw became a vision, was reporting to IFCA of the devastation that he was seeing on the seabed of his beloved kelp forest when the trawlers went through. So we'll be telling Sean's amazing story. We'll be telling Eric's powerful story of how those forests were lost, but also telling a story of just immense hope as these kelp forests come back, because they are coming back. And we'll also be filming some of the extraordinary science and social projects you'll shortly hear about, projects that will evaluate the kelp's return, its impact on our coastline and on our lives. And this will overlap with the work going on at Sussex Bay. So over the next year, we'll be releasing more media with big name support to all news and social media outlets. We're also planning a documentary for global release, and we're starting to think about content for schools and even a podcast. So our shared vision, together with your support, is that what happens here in Sussex will absolutely restore what has become an underwater desert to healthy, thriving seas. And that what happens here in Sussex will inspire change for all the UK's inshore waters. So thank you for listening.
Thank you, Sarah. That was brilliant. Thank you. So moving on from what Sarah said, the amazing team of Help Our Kelp has now sort of relaunched, and we are the Sussex Kelp Restoration Project. So we are now moving into a very exciting, active phase of this project, of this restoration. So as you saw before, the sort of core team, but we are ultimately a collaboration of national and local organisations. We take an evidence-based approach to the challenges of restoring the Sussex kelp. We work collectively to monitor the impact of the bylaw and the seabed habitat recovery, both ecologically, socially, and economically. We are the point of contact for information on Sussex kelp, and we will share our knowledge and experience with others, like Sarah said, to enable marine restoration elsewhere. So our vision is to champion, study, and facilitate the restoration of the Sussex kelp to support a thriving and sustainable marine ecosystem. And so we have a broad range of aims. Obviously, like I've mentioned, the first one, the ecological, social, and economic value and impact of the kelp and the bylaw is really key. But also feeding into that, we need to understand more the role of kelp in the blue carbon cycle, especially with implications for climate change. We need to identify and minimize damaging impacts on the kelp, raise awareness of the kelp as an ecosystem engineer, to scope and support active restoration trials for kelp, and to communicate all this research and work that we're doing to increase understanding and support of this fantastic project. So as a research outline, our research, a lot of this is already underway, fits into 4 broad themes: ecological, economic, social, and active restoration. And so here we break down a bit of the ecological research into various studies, but I'm going to hand over to Ian Hendy, he's our science lead. He couldn't be here, unfortunately, but he's done a pre-recorded presentation. So we'll hear from him a bit more about his research into ecological approaches.
Hello, everyone. So as already mentioned, my name is Ian Hendy, but first and foremost, I just want to take this opportunity to apologise to you all because I'm unable to join you today for this very important meeting. But I'm sure lots of information is going to come out at the end of this, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing what the outcomes are in actual fact. Now, I form part of the largest science group for the Sussex Kelp Restoration Project. So today I'm going to be talking about the science that's going to underpin this restoration project. And so today, I've called this brief presentation Ecological Approaches. Now, as you can see, forming a large consortia of the Sussex Kelp Restoration Project are all the organisations below here, making this possible in actual fact. So we do have this ambitious project. So by means of a little bit of context, and I know Sally is going to deliver more in detail on the background about this, but I just want to touch upon this. So we're spanning 40 years now. If we go back to the 80s, early 80s, we had extensive kelp forests spanning Chichester all the way to Brighton. Now, fast forward 40 years, we see a minuscule percentage of that. And we're down to 4% of those original areas of kelp forests. And I can remember as a teenager, as a commercial fisherman in the early 80s, that the kelp looked so dense that you could almost walk across it, and now we're at 4%. This has created what we call a phase shift. So the ecosystem has gone from a steady state to an unstable state. So the structure and the function of the kelp forest is now reduced. This means it's lost its nursery function, so therefore the biodiversity is reduced. So we've lost the commercial fisheries, and we've also lost the other ecosystem services as well. And so our aims, of course, is to restore an area of 170 square kilometres. This is in a protected area of 304 square kilometres that's now protected by the bylaw. Okay, so we want to restore 170 square kilometres of that. So this is a very ambitious project, we know, and there's going to be some areas that are going to be hard to restore and some areas that are going to be easy to restore. But we're going to talk about that and talk about how we're going to do this moving forward. But remember, we've undergone this phase shift, okay? So we've gone from a steady state to an unstable state. So we know there's going to be ecological consequences and problems along the way, but we've got a great science team behind us to help us with this. So I just want to celebrate those scientists in actual fact. So we have Jen Lewis from the Sussex IFCA. We have Kat Bruce and Katie Critchlow from Nature Metrics. We also have Ray Ward from the University of Brighton. We have Mika Peck from the University of Sussex. We also have Chris Yessen from the Zoological Society of London. And we also have Joe Preston, Mark Tupper, and Ruben Shipway from the University of Portsmouth. Now, I'm glad to know all of these people, these colleagues of mine and friends of mine, and I learn from them each week in actual fact. So we're very lucky to have these people driving the science, making this possible. So without further ado, let's investigate the projects that we have planned. So we have 3 PhD projects and various Masters of Research projects around that, so they all fit synergistically with one another. So first and foremost, we have the South Coast Biodiversity DTP funded PhD. This is in collaboration with Sussex University, Portsmouth University, Nature Metrics, and the Blue Marine Foundation. So what we're doing here are baseline surveys. Now remember, we're looking at an area that's protected now of 304 square kilometres. So doing baseline surveys of that whole area will not be feasible by doing diver surveys because it's a huge area to do accurately. So we're going to be using eDNA technology. So looking at population genetics, surveying these areas to get the signatures of the biodiversity in the area. Now, of course, this is going to determine of what's there and in the ecosystem. So this is going to help us identify what's there with those baselines. But of course, we're going to be using ground truthing as well. So in different areas with more accuracy, we're going to be using diver surveys as well, of course. Now, this is going to be in the area, as I said, of 304 square kilometers. So it's a big undertaking. So we're going to be using eDNA technology. Now, we're going to be mapping this over time. So with the recruitment of species over time, with the successful restoration of the kelp, we're going to see changes in those eDNA signatures over time, and of course corroborated by divers as well. So as the kelp recover, and we're seeing anecdotal evidence of that with a local diver, actually a fantastic local diver called Eric Smith, who feeds into us lots of information, which I'll talk about in a minute. But we're going to be looking at the eDNA technology and how that matches the biodiversity and the community structure over time with this PhD project. So that's our first PhD, looking at the baselines, mapping from year 1 to year 2 to year 3 and onwards. Then our second PhD, which is close to funding now in actual fact, we're looking at active and passive restoration. So what do we mean by active and passive restoration? So active restoration means that we have to give Mother Nature a little bit of a hand, okay? So what we need to do is seed hard substrata. So they could be ropes, they could be stones, they could be rocks. So we need to pre-seed them using native spores or sporophytes of kelp, so Laminaria digitata, Laminaria hyperborea. So we need to pre-seed these substrates, then transplant those substrates into areas where it's not readily restorable. That way then the kelp can then have a chance to regrow back. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit of detail in a minute, but then there's passive restoration, and we're already seeing signs of this in actual fact. And Eric Smith, as I've already talked about, a local diver in Sussex, he's been feeding important information back to us, telling us of some success stories of already re-established kelp in certain areas. This is really encouraging because we're starting to see kelp regrowth, and with that, the associated biodiversity. So this is really important. So what happens is, of course, the mature kelp will grow, release their spores and their sporophytes, their baby kelp will then settle adjacent on available hard substrata, therefore piggybacking alongside extending the aerial extent of those kelp forests. So super important. So this PhD is in collaboration with the University of Brighton, the University of Sussex, Zoological Society of London, and the University of Portsmouth. So for the active portion of it, so where we need to give Mother Nature a helping hand in the areas that are cordoned off with the phase shift, for example, so not readily restorable, not ecologically favorable in actual fact, so we're going to give it a helping hand. So we're going to collect kelp spores during the summer. And this is going to happen quite soon in actual fact. And we're going to actually use a reference site called Widewater in Shoreham. So this is readily accessible by going on the shore. So we don't need boats. So you can go access it from the shore. And we're going to collaborate, in actual fact, with the Scottish Association for Marine Science. So they're going to help us with the kelp propagation, creating kelp cultures or native kelp cultures, in actual fact. And what we're going to do is seed ropes and gravel and create an alginate, which is like this glue-like substance rich in spores that we can stick to hard substrata, then transplant those hard substrata with the alginate into Widewater, then obviously monitor the kelp growth. So super exciting times, in actual fact. We're going to get these native cultures by October, November and December by the end of the year. So it's super exciting times to get these cultures. Now, in a little bit more detail in terms of the collection of the Sussex natives. So June, July, we're going to be doing this. So we're going to be getting in the water with various dives, already sorted, in actual fact. So we're going to go in the water and get collection of those mature sporophytes or mature plants. These are going to be Laminaria hyperborea and Laminaria digitata. We're going to collect the fronds and we're going to send the spores to SAMS. Therefore, they'll be able to culture these spores, and we should be able to get those cultured spores from about December 2021 of this year, of course. This is going to give us a bit of lead in time, of course, between now and then. So this will enable us to get the licenses that we need to put those rocks, to put those ropes down in Widewater to allow us to see if regeneration is going to take place. So this gives us a bit of lead in time for that. Also, we can create a feasibility document as well. So what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? Okay, so in terms of the incubation of the kelp cultures. So this will help us do this. So we're going to create a document as we're going along with this of what's right and what's wrong and what the right way to do this is, particularly for the native species in Sussex. Again, using Laminaria hyperborea and Laminaria digitata. Also genetic profiling as well. So looking at the genetic fitness, this is going to enable us to look at the success rates of the regrowth of kelp of the native species in Sussex. So we're very excited to have all these experts working with us to do this. So not only are we looking at the baseline surveys to enable us to use eDNA techniques and of course ground truthing, we're going to be doing the active and passive restoration on top of that. Then we have a third PhD with private funding looking at kelp-derived carbon. And this is in collaboration with the University of Brighton and the University of Portsmouth. Now, kelp, I should say, unlike a seagrass habitat or unlike a salt marsh habitat, doesn't create a carbon sink, not in situ anyway. This is because you'll find with seagrass and salt marsh will grow in muddy environments, but kelp will establish itself on a rocky hard substrata. Now, the carbon will not sequester into the sediments there, obviously, so it gets transported. So that's why we call it a kelp conveyor, kelp carbon conveyor. So it draws down carbon very efficiently into the tissues of the fronds, the stipe. Now, in the form of dissolved organic matter and particulate organic matter, much of that carbon then gets transported to adjacent ecosystems and soft sediments elsewhere. And we're going to be looking at the fate of that carbon. So not only are we looking at the standing stock of biomass and the productivity, so looking at the growth of the carbon in kelp, okay, in areas of high dense forests, low dense forests as well. So we're going to be looking at that and mapping the growth and weight over time in a given area. We're going to be tracing the stable isotope analysis of the ratio of carbon and nitrogen. So radio-labeled carbon and nitrogen, we can actually trace that from kelp-derived carbon in different areas to establish where that carbon is going and the volume of that carbon. And we can also look, in actual fact, at the sediment accumulation rates as well, using lead-210. So super important. So that combined, of course, with the baseline surveys, looking at the biodiversity, using eDNA and ground truthing diver surveys, also looking at the active and passive restoration techniques of the kelp project, but also looking at the carbon and biomass and productivity of these forests. So the overall success. So these are the metrics that we're going to be using, and they all fit together really well. Then finally, we have lots of MRES projects planned as well that are really going to help bolster and support these PhD projects that we have. So first and foremost, we have baited remote underwater video surveys, and Sussex IFCA and the Blue Marine Foundation will be taking charge of these video surveys. And of course, we also have historical Landsat data, okay, so satellite data looking at UV light absorbency of kelp, so they will have a different signature to many other photosynthetic organisms. And we can actually match that with our eDNA technology to see how both technologies align in terms of the abundance and aerial extent of the kelp forest. And does it match with the eDNA signatures that we're finding? And does it match with the historical Landsat data that we have alongside with the active restoration that we're going to do? Also, we're going to be looking at fishery monitoring as well. So we're going to be using key indicator species with recruitment of species as and when new kelp is forming and extending. So we're expecting to see a great biodiversity, because with a loss of kelp, we see a 90% loss of associated biodiversity. So of course, if we improve that, not only are we improving the other ecosystem services such as water purification, reducing storm waves and reducing erosion, but we're increasing the commercial fish stocks. So it's a win for the ecology, win for the environment, and win for the economy as well. So we're going to be monitoring fisheries, biodiversity surveys of finfish, of invertebrates. Also, we're going to be involving stakeholder engagement. So the social science aspect of it, which of course is really important as well. And I know there's going to be a lot more in-depth talk about this later on in this meeting. So this just leaves me to say thank you very much for your time, everyone. I only wish I could make it. I may be able to make it later on if I'm lucky, but I hope this all goes well. And I'm very much looking forward to the outcome of this meeting today. So I hope to see you all a little bit later if I can, but if not, I'll speak soon. Thank you very much.
Great. So that was Ian giving us the lowdown, and this is just a still taken from last week of a sea search dive where they were collecting those eDNA samples. So really sort of cutting edge science and technology being used in this research. And to tell us a bit more about that is Sam Fanshawe from the Blue Marine Foundation.
Great. Thanks very much, Sally. Could I have the, yes, lovely, thank you very much. So I'd just like to really give a little bit more background following on from Ian's outline of some further ecological monitoring surveys that will start literally next month from the 5th of July. Blue, together with the University of Sussex and Sussex IFCA, will be running baited remote underwater video surveys, or BRUVs, at various sites to establish a baseline for the abundance and diversity of benthic mobile species. And this will be, we're looking at sites both within and outside the biolaw area, and also within the MCZ. And you can hopefully see just about the survey sites as shown by the red dots on this map. And these surveys are going to be taking place in July, and we're hoping to secure further funding to repeat the surveys on an annual basis, so that we can monitor changes as they occur. Next slide, please. So the use of BRUVs is a technique that we've previously used at Blue with the University of Plymouth to monitor the changes in mobile benthic species in the Lyme Bay Reserve, following a similar exclusion of trawling in the special area of conservation there back in 2008. And I just wanted to really sort of give you a few moments of light relief by showing this short 30-second video, which shows the BRUV in action in Lyme Bay. And you can see the baited cage resting on the bottom, attracting lots of poor cod and bib. And you can also see some Ross coral behind the cage, lots of pink sea fans. And these are the species which have really recovered significantly since trawling was excluded from the area in Lyme Bay 12 years ago. And you can also probably have seen a very inquisitive cuckoo wrasse, which came up to look at the camera there. So this video is recorded for 30 minutes at a time, and we do 3 replicate films at each survey site. And following this, the videos are analysed for species and abundance. So it's a really useful tool and makes for great bits of video footage as well to be able to share with the wider public. And that moves on to the economic research strand, because we really want to understand the impact of the trawling exclusion and kelp recovery on the economic value of the marine environment, as well as monitoring the ecological changes that occur. We're interested in really sort of looking at the economic value to a range of businesses, but as we haven't currently found funds to cover everything, we're focusing on assessing the economic changes affecting commercial fishermen initially. But we're really looking to expand this to recover recreational fishing and other local economies such as water sports and tourism as additional funding hopefully becomes available. And together with the University of Plymouth, who Blue's worked with previously in Lyme Bay, and with Sussex IFCA, we'll be establishing a benchmark for commercial fishing activity, capture rates and income. And we'll also be looking a bit more closely at the static potting fisheries to establish a baseline for commercially caught shellfish in the area, particularly the west of the area where potting is more prevalent, with a survey to be carried out in collaboration with local fishermen this August and September. And ideally, we'd like to do a similar survey of static net fisheries, which are more prevalent in the east of the area, and we're continuing to look for funding to support that. And finally, as we did in Lyme Bay, we want to assess any changes in the well-being of fishermen as a result of any positive impact of the bylaw and kelp recovery, and this will form part of a socioeconomic survey with fishermen this year. We're building a list of fishermen who might like to participate in the survey, but if I haven't already spoken to you and you have any contacts, please do get in touch. And finally, really, fishermen are just part of the bigger picture here, and I'm now going to hand over to Alice Tebb from MCS to outline the wider social research programme.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. So I guess I just wanted to kind of take a tiny step back and just say that, you know, this is a model from designed by Forum for the Future, who are a UK-based kind of systems change practitioner group. And, you know, as the Sussex Kelp Restoration Project, like, we are really keen that the kelp work is a successful and sustainable development. But in order to know if it is, we have to measure it. And, you know, Ian's talked about creating kind of sustainable natural capital, and understanding and monitoring that is the basis for our ecological programme. And Sam has talked a bit about economics, understanding the kind of financial impact of the bylaw, and, you know, future kelp work that it really requires that we understand and support positive change surrounding, you know, finances and material assets. But what connects the environment and economy is society. So within this kind of graph, human capital refers to people's knowledge, skills and motivations, and social capital refers to our relationships, values, social participation and trust. And, you know, we want kelp to positively impact the local quality of living, and the only way to understand if we have done that is to measure it. Next slide, please. So how is society impacted by the bylaw and the actions that we take as the Sussex Kelp Restoration Project and network of partners? And to me, this is kind of a better image for how the non-financial social values are connected with ocean values. And, you know, we're really keen to ask the question, now that the bylaw has happened, how is the relationship between society and sea changing? Next slide, please. So earlier this year, MCS supported a call with leading marine scientists to talk about, marine social scientists, to talk about what the impacts to society might be, and came out with kind of various social and economic research themes. And within that conversation, the social research themes really came out about understanding kind of shifting views and values, so past and present, in order to actually guide future communications and ensure kind of public support. Also to kind of monitor engagement and, you know, public understanding of the intrinsic value of nature, so not just its value as services for people, but in and of itself. Also, we want to understand the impact to mental health and well-being, including, you know, pride and place, social connectivity. I mean, look at this call. This is an example of the social connectivity that this bylaw is creating. And finally, also behaviour change. So during that call, we started listing, you know, who we thought might be impacted by the bylaw, depending on their different interests associated with the marine environment. And so I kind of took a sorting approach recommended by Sian Rees, so thanks very much for that. And this is a kind of draft version, and it's just to illustrate really, you know, so next slide, please. We have all sorts of things. Sorry, next slide, please. Thank you. There are all sorts of things that the a healthy seabed and, you know, future kelp forests can generate for us. And, you know, it's really important that we collect baseline data so that in the future we can understand the change that we create as a group, as a whole, as everybody here on this call kind of is here to support. And, you know, the social and economic sciences are a large piece of work, and we are a bit behind the ecological sciences. As Sam said, we aren't nearly as funded yet. And so we're really keen to work as a network to get this important baseline work done, because, you know, understanding the impact of the bylaw to society is so important. And we really want to work together to make sure that the baseline work is done, to make sure that we're not duplicating effort, and also to ensure that we don't unintentionally create data gaps. So really looking forward to, you know, within the network collaborating with everybody to make sure that we have a really solid foundation, so that moving forward we have something to look back on and compare against. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice and Sam. And so in light of all of that, as you can see, it's a hugely exciting, ambitious project. It has cutting edge science and technology. It has huge social value and economic value to the community. So we need to continue our work to understand all of that. And that's what brings me to this meeting, really, and what our purpose is here. Not only to introduce you to the Sussex Kelp Restoration Project and the core team driving that, but also to seek broader collaboration with strategic stakeholders so that we all work together to create a fantastic restored marine ecosystem. And in order to do that, we want to create a Sussex Kelp Restoration Network that will then inform working groups and develop a restoration plan. And thank you so much for all your pro forma responses. What was very clear is, amongst other things like the science and research and active restoration, the top interest in purple there, it was developing a restoration plan. So it's really good to know that there's that interest is there, that engagement, and we really want to capitalize on that, get everyone involved, create the Sussex Kelp Restoration Network, formulate these working groups, and that will drive a really comprehensive and successful restoration plan. And so before we break out into our smaller breakout groups to talk about how you'd like to be involved, I'm going to hand over to Henry, who's going to just say a few words. Okay. Over to you, Henry.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So I think in Sussex, it's safe to say we've actually got a really good track record of all of our organisations working really well together. But to my mind, the kelp restoration has just had such unprecedented level of interest and amazing support all through the bylaw process, with lobbying. So many of your organisations contacted MPs, contacted the Secretary of State directly, etc., to show your support, which is absolutely fantastic. So we hope that what we're presenting today, the kelp restoration, gives us all such an exciting opportunity to all work together, and most importantly, to all be on the same page. I think that our risks, if we don't work well together and don't stay on the same page. So, I mean, those risks, I suppose, are things like the kelp restoration becomes overly complex, or the messaging becomes not in sync with itself. And so it's just really important that as a group of organisations, we do work really well together. And there are lots of different places where you can look at the principles of good collaboration, but we particularly like these, so sharing, two-way exchange of knowledge, ideas and experience, co-creating, side-by-side development of a contribution to a solution, and trust, genuine confidence in the intention and integrity of those involved. And so everything that we aim to deliver from here on with the Sussex Kelp Restoration Project is going to have those core principles right at the very heart of them. We also know that in Sussex, there are already some great networks and groups and organisations working. So when we have no intention of the Sussex Kelp Restoration Project being somewhere where conversations have to be repeated, we want to add value to those existing partnerships. So for example, the Sussex Local Nature Partnership, the Marine and Coastal Forum, Chasm operating in the Selsey area, and the Developing Sussex Bay. So we want to make sure that the Sussex Kelp Restoration is adding value to all of those conversations. So the breakout rooms that we're going to be having right now are really to try and get your views about what you would like to see coming out of this working together. So we've got 3 questions to ask. In each group, there will be someone who's kind of preempted as a facilitator who will lead you through these questions. We've got, I think, half an hour. Sally, do correct me if I'm wrong. Half an hour for these breakout rooms. And thank you so much for your contribution. And let's all really make sure we do a gold standard in collaborating together. Okay, thanks, Sally. I think, Emma, you can put us into our breakout rooms.
Okay, cool. So I can't seem to actually share my screen again, but really it was just to wrap up from the breakout groups. And I hope you found it all helpful. I was going to ask if any of the facilitators of the breakout groups wanted to just sort of unmute and give a headline of any hot topics that came out of that, really, in terms of collaboration and moving forward. Sam, thanks.
Yeah, we had a really positive conversation and some great ideas came out of ours. So in terms of sort of how people wanted to sort of be engaged, the idea of working groups was very positive, and included in that was the potential for a working group on terrestrial impacts, which would encompass seaweed on beach, but also other impacts as a result of the bylaw. But also the need for an overarching group that would coordinate, in particular, communications and engagement, which is a role that really everyone in the network can contribute to, and will have communications channels already in place that we could all collectively use to communicate the project. And as part of that, a point was made about shared messaging, making sure that we're kind of saying the same things, using the same terminology. And in terms of how people would, the sorts of communication channels that would be favourable, website received positive, was seen as a positive to sort of share information and have the kind of go-to platform. If you want to know about Sussex Kelp, there's interest in a biannual or quarterly update similar to this sort of event, with people able to give their updates from their respective perspectives and projects. Email newsletter was also something that people would find useful, and some offers to share social media. So a lot of members of the group would be happy to forward on social media messaging as well to their connections. So and some other specifics which I'll share out with, but those are the main points for our group.
Brilliant, thanks, Sam. Alice, would you like to give any feedback?
Yeah, sure. So everything that Sam said was echoed, but in addition to that, there was kind of something about the network kind of having a platform for the whole network to share learning. So not just hearing from the kind of same organizations, but, kind of who is learning, let's talk about it, let's share, so it's not just the kind of core groups necessarily, and really kind of like the idea as well of kind of different levels of engagement too, and how we can kind of, I suppose, kind of also channel volunteer action as well, thoughts around that. So yes, but finally, sorry, around connecting enabling connections within the network. So whether that's creating like a social media page or so on, so that, you know, there can also be kind of like cross-learning and lots of interdisciplinary kind of focus, so that it's policymakers, academics, NGOs, industry, all kind of working together to really kind of create and achieve. So
Great.
thank you.
Fantastic, thanks, Alice. So yeah, so really that's all we've got time for, and but because I can't share my screen, I just want to flag up a couple of dates for you to bear in mind. We're organising a sedimentation meeting in July. So any of you that are directly interested in sedimentation as an issue, please do let me know directly, and we can involve you in that. Also, a date for the diary is November the 17th, which is the Kelp Summit, which is going to be a fantastic event, and where we want to bring together loads of expertise. Henry, thank you. And yeah, and then really just the next steps from here are, thank you, Henry. So the next steps really from moving on from this meeting is I will send you this presentation in PDF format. We'll send you the feedback from the breakout groups, and we'll also give you details to sign up to the Sussex Kelp Restoration Network, and hopefully keep this conversation going, and where you can feed back to us, and we can make this project a fantastic success. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for organising it. Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah,
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Thanks, everyone.